Hopefully you can see the screen. So thank you for being here. Just to give you a little bit of update, and especially for the recording, for people who are going to listen to the recording. My name is Paveen. I work at the University of Sheffield and Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals as Professor of Nursing and Professor of Gender-Based Violence. These are monthly workshops which we do. It's myself and Sarah Gardner from Doncaster DBTH, who do these monthly workshops to basically increase awareness or answer questions with regards to publications, grant writing, research, anything around that research and scholarly sort of section. So today we are going to talk about peer review. What is it and how to handle it? So before I do that, Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself and then I can take that forward?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Gardner. I'm the Clinical Evidence Specialist for the Trust, and I've been supporting Parveen with this series of webinars. So the library service at DBTH does as much as it can to support research and to support the writing for publication process. And if you're curious, then you can Google for DBTH Library, and you will find our library website, which has a specific set of pages to support research. And I'll put the link in the chat shortly.
Thank you. So today we are going to talk about peer review. What is it and how to handle it? So this is one of the questions which many people ask and they get confused about or do not always know how to handle peer review related issues. So we just thought we'll talk about that today. How do why am I an authority to talk about this? So I am editor-in-chief of International Nursing Review for more than a year now, and I have been editor and on editorial board. So I've been an editor of Nursing Open, which is a Wiley journal again, and I'm on the editorial board of Journal of Advanced Nursing and Journal of Interpersonal Violence. And that just shows my kind of interest in everything else. And I'm also now on the international editorial board of Nursing Open. So writing for academic journals, when we write for journals, people usually think that you are writing it for audience, but you need to think through as to who do you want to write it for. And there are usually three people that you write it for. And one is editor, the other one is reviewers, and the third one is the audience. So audience comes kind of towards the end. That doesn't mean the focus don't need to be on the audience. You all, whatever type of writing you do, even if it's a blog, even if it's a report, even if it's kind of a short paragraph for something, or anything that you write, it's always good to think of who's your audience and what is the message that you want to convey to them. So that definitely is there. But when you submit, when you write for a journal or for anything, editors are the first people who are going to have a look at that and read that. And if they think this piece is worthy and meets the criteria, usually at that stage is usually about the scope and the focus of the journal. If what you've written is according to it and meets those requirements, written well, flows well, and has a good message, that's what editors usually look for at that stage. Then they find reviewers. Reviewers are usually people who are expert in the same field as you are or in the topic that you have written and submitted. And then those reviewers read it through carefully, and because they work in the same field, they know a lot about the science, the approach, how it should be written, current trends and everything else. So they are able to critically evaluate the piece that you have submitted and give you some feedback on that. And once you have acted to their feedback, then it's the audience who gets the final piece. So peer review is usually kind of described in a way that, through this picture, you can see that this person is going, wanting to publish, and a paper accepted is the line towards the end where he needs to reach. And you can see there are quite a lot of obstacles in the way before he gets to the end line. And peer reviews, usually that's the kind of thing that people think, that it's usually often difficult to get through peer reviewers. And people even name this, that, peer review 2, for example, is always more difficult. And sometimes there could be very desperate or very different reviews from both reviewers. One might say, oh, this is extremely good, and the other might say, well, it's completely rubbish. And you just think, well, okay, which one do I believe on? So lots of questions comes around peer review. So when it comes to the process of kind of submitting into a journal, peer reviewers not only look at the manuscripts and give you feedback. Once you have written your feedback and once you've acted on their feedback, it goes back to them again. And they then suggest, they don't make decisions for articles to be accepted or rejected. They recommend a decision, and then it's the editor-in-chief who usually makes that decision, depending on what recommendations they have got from editors, what recommendations they've got from peer reviewers, and making their own judgment. They decide that if the paper needs to be rejected or revised or resubmitted. So, okay, I'm trying to peer review. It's a means of sieving out evident errors, currently unacceptable practices, repetitions of previously published work without acknowledgement, and trivial contribution that adds little to knowledge. At the same time, it is a way of giving feedback, because when you're writing something, you have got a lot of information in your head, which then means that when you're reading what you have written, it's all very good and clear in your head, and it all makes sense. But the thing is that when an audience need to read a piece, they need to, you're not going to be standing with them, telling them what did you actually mean. This is the piece that you've written needs to stand alone, and the review and the reader need to be able to make an inference of everything that you have written there. So peer review helps with that. The peer reviewer give you that sort of, act that's kind of a mirror, and ask you those questions, suggesting that this is not very clear, tell me what this is all about, and then you're able to clarify. An end product, usually, regardless of what you hear about peer reviewers and peer review, you might hear that it's a good process. Some people believe it's not a good, so good process. But regardless of what you hear, the quality of the manuscript towards the end of the process has always improved. Okay, use of peer review, where does it happen? It happens in many different places. We are talking about journal article, but it happens and it is used in other places too. For example, in selection processes. So when somebody is applying for a job, for instance, there are 2-3 people who shortlist the application and look at the applications and come up with a decision or interview process. So that's peer review process. Academic publication is one process. Grant applications, when you're submitting a grant application, whether it's a small one or large one, or funding applications of any kind, that's where it is used. It is also an informal feedback mechanism within universities, within institutions, within hospitals, where performance is reviewed and talked about, and things at the end, it needs improve. When it comes to publication process, reviewers act as gatekeepers. So as an author, you submit something, it goes to reviewers who read through this, it goes to editorial and production team who look at the aspects, it then again goes to the wider community and general public who also can act your feedback, and then the loop comes in, and then that feedback comes back to author, which then feeds them on, helps them write the next manuscript or aspect that they are writing. Peer review can be of different types. So you have got double-blind peer review. That's the most common type usually used for, in which the authors don't know who the reviewers is, and the reviewers don't know who the authors are. Okay, so only the editor knows. In between, no identifiable information is shared with anyone. And the reviewer gets the manuscripts without any identification of the authors or their institutions, etc. They read through the document and they give information as to what they think. Then there is single blind peer review as well, in which the authors would so reviewers know who the authors are, but the authors don't know who the reviewers are. And then there is open peer review, where both parties know each other. So authors know the reviewers and the reviewers know the authors as well, by means of their names, and everything else is written there. There are strengths and weaknesses of all these approaches. When it comes to double-blind peer review, because nobody knows everybody, anyone. People are usually comfortable in giving their views about what's written without any repercussions, and they can be more open and honest, and at the same time people can be more cruel and kind of, a little bit more stricter in how they're responding. When it is single blind peer review, the peer reviewers know the author, and that can supposedly can cloud their judgment if the field is very small, and let's say that you already know the author and things like that. So it could be any of those sorts of issues can arise. With completely open peer review, transparency is there. People know who people are. So in a way, it helps people to make sure that they're not mean or kind of, giving comments or completely negative review to somebody. But then it can also mean that they are trying to not to say what they wanted to say about the quality of the paper. There are some issues with that. Peer reviewers, regardless of for which we use, relies on the integrity of the reviewer, that, are they qualified to comment? Do they have enough knowledge about the issue? Do they have enough qualifications, enough ability to do it? Conflict of interest, do they have any conflict of interest? Have they been writing something similar? Or have they been, they're usually not engaged with the research, but it can be that they've been right because it's the same field. So it can be that they probably have that idea, they wanted to write about it. So could that be an issue? There could be biases, for example, other fractions within the research community, representation of women, minority groups, when it comes to journal articles, representation of different countries, people from different cultures and places. Do they understand, do we have enough peer reviewer from various different places so that they understand the context in which the person has published and are able to give good feedback, and it just doesn't really only translate to one particular community. People working in less prestigious institution, do they get exposure to writing peer review? It's a consensus process, and there is high risk of adventurous research is less likely to be supported by multiple reviewers. So usually, even when it comes to journal articles, editors would look at the decision made by both reviewers and then make a decisions for themselves. So more or less, it can also be a consensus sort of a process, and then it depends on the chance. So what do editors do? So when something is submitted, you send the manuscript to at least two peer reviewers. Sometimes it could be more than two, sometimes it could be three, but at minimum it is two. And when the review comes back, let's say if both reviewers has accepted the manuscript, editor will look into it, and it's pretty easy decision. If both have given minor revision or major revision, it's a pretty easy decision. Problem usually arises when one reviewer have said accept and the other reviewer have said reject. In those scenarios, the editors would go into it, read through the comments of both reviewers, read the articles and make their own decisions about it, and then see what needs doing. If the comments are such and they agree with sort of the feedback which the reviewer have given, they perhaps would ask for revisions, or usually if there is that kind of a big difference between the suggestions from those two reviewers and editors are not able to they think they need further evidence, they may go to a third person and ask them to review the manuscript again, and depending on what feedback they get from that person, the decision of the manuscript would depend on that sort of issue. So usually when there is that kind of discrepancy between two reviewers, that's where it needs attention. So I'm going to skip this part. So when it comes to dealing with reviewers, there are things that you need to do, and I think my slides are okay. I'm going to talk about this. So when it comes to dealing with reviewers' comments, so usually once they have seen it, editors look into the comments and they try and send you comments in a way that you can make sense, and you will have a list of from reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 and perhaps the editors themselves. How do you handle it? It's important that these are handled properly, and it's important that they are kind of you have done everything one by one, so that you've answered all the questions they're asking you. So so there is 10 simple rules for writing a response to reviewer. I've given you the link to the article from William Stafford Noble, who has written this, and these are very good. So I'm just going to use these one. Rule number 1, provide an overview, then quote the full set of reviews. So this is for response letter. So always make sure that you have a separate response letter which responds back to each of the points that reviewers had asked you, and you answer to those points. So the response letter typically begins with a summary of the changes that you have made and pointing out any new data or any new analysis that you have done or anything that you've done differently in response to the criticism that you have received from all the reviewers. Rule 2, be polite and respectful. So even if you are convinced that the reviewers did not understand what I was trying to do, or they lack intellectual capacity, or it's not their area of interest, or they were not bothered, they haven't done it right, even then, please be polite and respectful and try and answer the question kind of, in that sense. Rule number 3, accept the blame. Now, I do have a little bit with this, but having said that, if the reviewer fails to understand something, apologize for not making it clear. I mean, people may have different perceptions about accepting the blame, but where I come from is that the point which I've earlier made, that if you have submitted something and you're not standing there to explain what it is, if the reader is not understanding what you have written, that means it's not clear. So if they fail to understand something, apologize for not making it clear and try and clarify what that means. Rule number 4, make the response self-contained. So when you make changes to the text or to the figures, or quote the changes directly in the response, so tell them that, thank you for your comment, we have made these changes, and we have made, please check page 10, line 2, or something like that, specific page number or line number, so that it's easier for them to go and track that sort of change. Why is that so? The peer reviewer, once it has gone from the editor, peer reviewer would have your paper for about 12 weeks. So they've read something, they come back to editor. So by the time it has come back to you, you will take another 8 to 12 weeks. So already a lot of time has passed. So if you send it back to them, they would have to go through the whole thing again and may not remember what sort of questions they asked, where you directly pointed out which place you have made the change and what change you have made. It's easier for them to identify that aspect and look into it. Rule number 5, respond to every point raised by reviewers. So usually once you have submitted something after the reviews, sometimes it comes back and say, well, you haven't addressed all the comments raised by the reviewers, and therefore there is another revision. So it's important that you respond to each point raised by the reviewers, even if you disagree with them. And it's okay to explain it, and say, well, if you disagree with something, you can say that, this is the reason we disagree with this comment, or this is what we have done to sort this out, but try not to ignore it, try to address it. So do address the point. Use the typography to help the reviewer navigate the response. So use change of typeface, color, or highlighters or something like that in a way that which helps them understand, what changes you have made, where they can see the stuff is coming from the reviewer, where is your response, or anything else. So it can be done within the reviewer response document where you respond back to it, but then in the manuscript, I usually do it that I use a red font or something like that and make sure that, changes where I have made are highlighted accordingly. These days, quite a lot of people use track changes documents, that they do track change into one document, but then they also submit a clean copy so that, reviewers have both of those copies with them. Rule number 7, whenever possible, begin your response to each comment. So you can provide background information, but you should do so after giving your primary response. So, again, it goes back to the same aspect that you respond back to every point which they have asked for and give them a direct answer to the point that they have raised, whether you have addressed this or whether you haven't addressed it, and the reason why you haven't addressed this. When possible, do what the reviewer asks. Where possible, I think it's useful that, you should avoid giving the impression that you couldn't be bothered to carry out the additional experiments or analysis or the change into the document. If a reviewer has suggested something, that means that it's not very clear. So try and clarify it and, do the changes which have been suggested to you, unless you feel really strongly about it. And then you can talk to them and say, well, we're not doing this because of this, and this reason. But generally speaking, when possible, do what they're asking you to do. Be clear about what changed relative to the previous version. So again, I think it goes back to the same thing that when you make a change in response to a reviewer's comments, it can sometimes be difficult to convey to the reviewer exactly what that change consisted of. But make sure that you say how it has changed from previous versions. Usually it is by saying it's not so much of a problem unless there is this, you have to change the analysis, and that has changed the messages that you were trying to give, but explain how the things have changed from previous version. And sometimes it could be as simple as using different color fonts and clearly showing that this is how things have changed from the previous version. This is how things have been added into the document. And rule number 10, if necessary, write the response twice. In addition to the response to reviewer letter, you may in some case want to write a separate letter to the managing editor, usually cover letter, where you can explain what changes you have made. It doesn't have to be, again, the same detailed one, but just a brief one. But I think this is a little bit unnecessary. Unless you really feel strongly about it, you could do this. But I just wanted to present this rule also because some people may find that useful. And then it is about learning to let go of things. When we are writing, it could be quite daunting. We can think of, oh my God, it's not ready enough. It's not ready yet. And you could spend a lot of time trying to improve things. So learning when to let go is also very good strategy. And you have to kind of, push yourself to do it. And over time, you do learn when to stop and when to let go, but learn when you need to let go and submit the manuscript. There's a lot of information about nursing and nurse author and editor site about various different aspects, starting from peer review or writing or author related queries and things like that. So that could be really a useful thing to read through if you ever want to. And that's it. Thank you for listening. And here is my contact detail. I hope you found this session useful, but please do come back to me if you have got any questions. I'm just going to stop sharing now. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to stop the recording.